Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I want to showcase the modding project known as Community Shaders. They were introduced into Skyrim not too long ago. The Community Shaders are an ongoing project made by Doodlez and the greater modding community, aimed at improving the game's graphics and visual quality, while also, in my experience, still providing a good performance for the game to actually run. Shaders in general can be used to create more realistic lighting, shadows, and other visual effects, ranging from simple enhancements to more complex configurations. Also, before we begin, I do want to mention that the community shaders are a work in progress, with more tools and mods being released over time, so it's always a good idea to check and stay updated with what has been added or improved upon. For now, I will quickly run through each of the recommended community shader mods that I am using in this video. Firstly is the vanilla HDR add-on, which will greatly increase the HDR rendering of your game. Skyrim lighting is limited to the SDR range, but does support HDR and was previously only available to AMD users, so it's great to see improvements like this being made for everyone to use. Also, when installing this mod, be sure to follow the mod page instructions and edit your Skyrim preferences INI file to include the mentioned values to get the best results. Then we have the grass lighting mod that adds lighting to your grass. This for me is a big one and makes a big difference in your game's graphics. When comparing to a game without grass lighting, you can really see how dull and dark the grass looks. Compared to the new bright, vibrant grass, you can actually see individual blades. We can then pair this with the grass collision mod, which makes the grass react to your character movements. This is really just a tiny detail in the grand scheme of things, but adds a really nice layer of immersion to your game. Next, we have the Screen Space Shadows add-on, which allows objects to cast shadows onto themselves, as well as more detailed near and far shadows for objects such as grass and trees. This will add a lot of detail and intensity to your shadows in-game. A good example is again with your grass, where each plant will now cast a shadow, making it a lot more realistic and adds a nice level of detail. We also have the water blending mod, which blends the water with the terrain in a much more natural manner, so you no longer have that harsh water seam at the edge. A very simple mod that also has no impact on your performance, so can be used by everyone. Another big addition is the Complex Parallax Materials mod, which adds a 3D effect to certain materials to provide a more realistic visual quality with actual depth, rather than just a 2D material appearing very flat. Here you can see the difference between having parallax enabled and disabled. This mod also adds parallax shadows in regards to directional light to make the materials look even more realistic. And lastly is the mod called Tree LOD Lighting, which is more optional and improves lighting to the distant trees on your landscape. It works with both modded and vanilla trees, so it's up to you if you think you need this one. Overall, all of these mods together will greatly increase the visual quality of your game, and I have to say the Community Shaders collection have exceeded my expectations. Maybe my expectations were too low, but they honestly look great in a lot of places. Obviously, they are a huge improvement over vanilla Skyrim, and I think give a great vanilla plus feeling to your game. You can see the lighting and shadows are a night and day difference. And if you're like me, as I mentioned before, one of the first things you will notice is the grass. In vanilla Skyrim, the grass is very dull and lacks any sort of lighting and highlights, but with community shaders, your landscape will come to life with vibrant fields of grass that react to directional light. The more intense shadows on both near and far objects are also fantastic, and altogether provide a much improved playing experience. The community shaders also come with an in-game menu where you can edit the settings as you play. To open the menu, simply press the End key. Once open, you will see you can enable and disable all the shaders with the press of a button. This gives you a great perspective on what changes have actually been made to your game. You can also enable and disable certain aspects on a one-by-one basis. For example, I can disable anything that affects the grass and so on. But perhaps the best thing about this menu is the ability to adjust the settings of each mod to your personal liking. For example, if I go into the grass lighting mod, I can adjust how intense the lighting affects the grass, making it either much darker or brighter. Another great example is in the parallax mod options. You can actually adjust the height map of the parallax effect to increase the amount of depth or make the surface appear more flat, depending on your own taste. You can also adjust the shadows of the parallax effect, increasing or lessening the intensity. Speaking of shadows, another great option is the screen space shadow tab lets you adjust the intensity of these as well. As you can see, the shadows on my grass are quite intense, but I can easily reduce this to make the landscape a little more vibrant. Overall, this in-game menu is incredibly intuitive and easy to use, and I recommend everyone to have a go and experiment with certain settings to find what you like. Just remember, if you like what you have done, don't forget to save your configuration up the top. Or if you've made it look worse, just hit load settings to revert back to what it was. Moving on to performance, which I'm sure many of you are interested in. But before we get into it, for this section of the video, there will be an FPS counter in the top right hand corner of the screen. But I also want to mention that performance will greatly depend on your own hardware and PC specs, so please note this is only my experience using these mods. Starting off, let's take a look at some of the exterior areas. Most of the time, my FPS floated between 70 and 90, sometimes moving a little higher or a little lower. This of course doesn't mean much without a comparison, so here is my game with no community shaders installed, where I'm getting around 100 FPS, then dipping into the 80s and 90s. On the flip side, with community shaders installed in the same area, I don't reach 100 frames, but I still stay in the 80s and 90s, with a loss of around 10 frames, which actually really surprised me, as I was expecting much more. For science, I did then install an EMB to see the difference, and with an EMB, my frames floated around the 60 FPS area, which means another drop of approximately 20 frames, but overall it wasn't that bad either. In more populated areas, like the city of Whiterun, the shaders would drop to 60 frames per second, but with no shaders installed, I only gained a handful of frames at most, which again really surprised me. For interiors, I was able to maintain a good performance above 100 frames for the most part, even when in combat and surrounded by multiple enemies. Overall, I would say that the performance with the community shaders is very good and had very little impact when comparing with no shaders installed at all. To summarize, often there is a trade-off between having good graphics and worse performance in-game, but in my experience, community shaders have found a good balance between improving the visuals of the game while not impacting the performance too much. And if you're someone who wants to prioritize performance, or have struggled to use an EMB in the past, then this is definitely a good option for you. The community shaders are also not finished, and it's exciting to see what the future will hold in this aspect, so definitely keep an eye out and watch this space. I'm also curious to know what you have experienced with the community shaders, so let me know down in the comments. Otherwise, that's it for this video, a little bit different than my normal video today, so if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I will catch you again next time. Cheers.